Welcome back to All the Shit with Tom and Will. Thank you for joining us. This episode, I'm going to say up front, might be a trigger for some people. This conversation involves explicit description of drug use, alcohol abuse, substance abuse in general, and it also touches on sexual abuse. So if you are a person who is triggered by these types of things, just be warned, this is a conversation that involves a lot of that stuff.
Tom, 2 for 2. Another amazing interview.
Man, I don't even have to try. These guys are doing all the heavy lifting. I mean, I'm just there absorbing, and I can't express my appreciation enough for Jason stepping up and agreeing to have this conversation with me.
Absolutely. Much respect, Jason. I love transparency. I love openness. I think that, when we embrace that, we can have real conversations, right? Which is what I'm all about. I know you love that too. So thank you, Jason. Awesome conversation.
This conversation was especially interesting to me because it opened my eyes to a world that I have not experienced personally, and I don't even have anyone in my direct orbit that has experienced the trauma, substance abuse, and really a true road to recovery that Jason has experienced. And so for me, it was a very big learning opportunity, and I came away with a new appreciation for what people go through in their lives, and particularly the concept that you don't know somebody truly until you have a conversation with them and you understand where they're coming from. It's too easy for us to judge people based on what we see at face value. And I think what you'll learn in this conversation with Jason is that this path is long and winding, and there are many, many chances to start over and effectively get your life back.
Yeah, if you are fighting that battle, do not give up.
Please enjoy this conversation with Jason Gray.
Hello? Hello? Is anybody out there?
Welcome to All the Shit with Tom and Will.
He said we're hitting the record button. I like it. Hello, everybody.
I think what's interesting about this, Jason, is that you and I have met twice in person. So once, a year ago?
Yeah.
The first time we came out since you and Jenna got married. And then yesterday was the second time we hung out. And I thought it was pretty awesome how comfortable you were almost immediately with just, giving me a hug and saying what's up. And it was like we've known each other.
Instant connection.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. You're my only brother-in-law. So, I don't have a lot of experience with this, but I know that, my brother and his brother-in-law are not exactly tight buds. Right. And, the proximity of where we live is going to prevent us from being like weekly hangout buddies. But to know that I have someone in my life who is open, honest, transparent, and I truly think that, just based on our conversation last night, you're looking for a lot of the same things out of life and in life that I am. And that's a big part of what this series is my goal is to get to know as many men as I can on that personal level. And through that connection, be able to build my own tool set for how I move through the world. But I think more importantly, gain a better holistic perspective of what life is for men in this country, but really around the world. And the way that it's changed from, how we grew up thinking manhood was X, Y, Z, and we had to accomplish these things or do these things to reach that title or status. And then you get to be our age. I mean, I'm 40, you're 45.
Right.
And we're looking back on it like, man, that was, I feel like I was sold a false bill of goods, know? So I guess if you want to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. First of all, my name is Jason Gray, and I'm honored to be on your show today. And it is definitely serendipitous the way that the stars aligned. I feel like, in a nutshell, I hit the lottery ticket when I met this family. Speaking of the Rieger family and everything that branches from that, all through the community and through our family. And I'm honored to be your brother-in-law.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I feel the same.
Thank you. Yeah. And, we may have been sold a false bill of goods, in our childhoods and stuff like that. But today we get to rewrite the fundamental ideas and look at them in a new perspective and be courageous men that get to guide and strengthen others
Absolutely.
along the way.
And I know you wanted to start with a meditation.
Yeah, we could start with a prayer and meditation. One of my daily practices is prayer. Meditation, I also like to read a couple little verses. I don't get too involved in scripture, but I do like to touch on it daily. Yeah, I stepped away from it a little bit for last month or so. I haven't really been reading this, but I picked it up today in lieu of our sitting down, and I wanted to see what was in here for us. And, it's funny, oftentimes I'll just crack the book open and see where it falls. It fell on July 13th, so it's about where it was creased. It's probably about where I last left off. And with some of the things that we're going to touch on today, I feel it more relevant than what the reading was from today. So I'm going to read July 13th from Hazelden Touchstone. It says, if I were to begin life again, I should want it as it was. I would only open my eyes a little bit more. From Jules Reynard. Spiritual and emotional growth is a process of raising our awareness. Reflecting on our growth as men, before this program and after, we see different levels of consciousness. Some of us might say we weren't at all conscious of what it meant to be a man by the time we entered the adult world. Now we are forming an awareness of manhood. We see ourselves more as recovering, caring, strong, vulnerable men in relationships with others. We have an increased sense that our actions make a difference as sons, as fathers, as husbands, lovers, and friends. Our increased understanding of ourselves makes it possible to fulfill our potentials for growth. It is not idle fantasy to imagine beginning life again because, in a sense, we have. In recovery, it seems we have begun life again, only with our eyes a little more open. Help me live this day with all my awareness. And so I think that taking away little inserts like that into your life as a daily practice, it really dumps into the spiritual bank. And it's paying big dividends right now with the way that things continue to grow as I continue to develop and grow a closer connection with my higher power.
Yeah, I thought that was a really introspective and powerful passage. When did you start this practice of reading these meditations?
I was first introduced to it 2000 through AA in the 12-step program. It kind of introduced me to daily practices.
Is that when you first got into the program? Is that when you started the program?
I would say it was the first time I started the program. I was 21. It was in 1999. My first introduction to AA and NA, or a 12-step program, was at first an NA meeting when I was 14. Just kind of went on a random whim with a friend. The second time I was 16, I went court-ordered for an unrelated incident, not really related to substance abuse directly, but the judge seemed fit that I go check out an AA meeting. Then I went back on my own accord at 21, and that's when I started to write to the General Service Office out in New York and get responses and started meeting with other AA members.
So if you were court-ordered to attend at 16 and then went on your own accord at 21, it sounds like you have the majority of your life have been dealing with this. So let's start at the beginning. I know yesterday you had mentioned you had recently started just kind of writing down your memories of your life starting from birth. Mm-hmm. And I think you said you got through age 8?
Got to 8, yeah.
Yeah. So walk me through that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, and I was, kind of thinking about that this morning as well. And really, before I even knew that what I was trying to break a generational curse. I don't know if curse is an appropriate word, but yeah. So at 2.5, when my father abandoned me, my DNA structure was changed, and it wasn't apparent immediately. But by time, fast forward 2.5, 3 years, when I was getting pictures taken at preschool and kindergarten, it was written on my face. I still had the nice fluffy sweater on that my grandma probably bought me for Christmas, but my face, I have this cute blonde hair, chili bowl cut with big blue eyes, but I'm sitting there just like sulking, in preschool and kindergarten photos.
Do you remember any of your feelings from that time?
Yeah, man. Just ice. Just like, where's my father?
Even at 2, you were acutely aware of that absence in your life.
No, sir. No, I don't have an acute awareness of 2, but I believe that's what 2.5, like that's when the process began. Like the morning I woke up and my father wasn't there. I didn't realize it, and I don't have an acute awareness of it until I was probably 5 or 6, maybe 4, as early as 4, but that's when at 4 is when it was really like hitting me, I think. And I didn't know it was hitting me until about 6 or 7, and I'd see those pictures at 8 and I would be like, ooh, what's going on there?
So you were raised just by your mom?
Yeah, single mom, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so with that being the case, you don't really have at that point a role model in your life per se to model what a man should be or how a man should act.
Absolutely not. Not in the small town in 1980. My mom was definitely an outcast. I had like zero recollection of a parent until or a father figure actively in my life, aside from my father when he left at 2.5. So from like 2.5 to about 5.5, just because there weren't any. I mean, I had like my grandfather and my uncle, but I didn't even have memories or meet them until I was like 7 or 8.
So the family structure that you were a part of, where you guys lived, your mom she'd already moved away from the nuclear family?
Correct, yeah. There was the first generation of brokenness in our family was my mom's parents. My mom was the oldest of 4 siblings, and she was 16 when she got pregnant with her first child. I'm her 4th child, her 4th boy. So she was 22 when she had me, and so 23, and she'd already lost custody of her 3 boys due to substance abuse and stuff of that nature. Long story short, by the time my little sister and I, who's a 1.5 years younger than me, came about, my mom was just probably spinning a little bit out of control in our small town. And 'cause I remember summers staying in the car, living at my grandmother's, lots of boyfriends and stuff like that, but there were no role models. Like I didn't even see the boyfriends or many men in my life until I was probably, like I said, 6, 5.5, 6.
So at that point then, the men who did come into your life, were they staples, or was it more like a revolving door of whoever was currently filling that role?
It was a revolving door. That being said, the revolving door consisted of what I would imagine was probably 3 relationships, but one was abusive. And that was the last one I remember before my mom got remarried to my stepfather.
Thinking of my own childhood, I don't know, I can't pinpoint exactly when I started thinking about what it would mean to be a man. And I think for me, it was just looking at, all right, well, who are the coolest, what's the coolest job that I could do? Who has the most respect, authority? Those are the kind of things that I think I looked at as that's what a man is, right?
Yeah.
So I gravitated toward the obvious, police officers and firefighters and stuff like that. So for you, and this is coming from a kid who has, my father was in the picture, and I had a great dad. Right, so I got very, very lucky. I'm aware that I'm very lucky. My parents are still together. But I looked at my dad as a role model, absolutely. But he was, and I've heard this from other men too, they kind of compartmentalize their dad as their dad, and then there's other men. So yes, there's one role model there, but you're also looking out and saying, what else is this reflected? Do I see this reflected in other men?
Yeah.
So for you not having that initial pillar, how did you, or where did you start looking for sources to validate who you were or model who you should become?
Sure. A long story short, I had 13 years, like I would say the first 13 years of my life, I had really good examples of like exactly what I didn't want to be as far as the characteristics of a man.
So you knew that
Really
what you were
strict.
seeing was not what you wanted to do.
Yes, sir. So my first recollection of like a man of character would come through way of a girlfriend's father. I was about 13 years old, and she was like, yeah, come over to my house, blah, 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 and we'd hang out in the kitchen. And, you know, I remember walking through the garage and seeing her father in there, and, you know, he had a go-kart on a stand in his car, and had this, like, huge red and black tattoo on his forearm. And I just, back then, like, I didn't see anyone else in Southport, Indiana with tattoos. So back then, that was pretty bold for him to have that loud tattoo. And I identified with that because, you know, a lot of other people in my family, direct family, prior to moving to Indianapolis, had tattoos. So at 13, that whole process started, and there was something there. So I kind of would form these ideas of what a man would look like based off his material status. And then, you know, that evolved, though. That was like a first introduction. The second one was a bobsled Olympian, won the bronze medal with the USA Olympics. Has a small gym on the south side. When I was 14, I'd go in there and work out, and he showed me a different kind of man, like a man of character.
Yeah, and what were some of the things that stood out to you that you remember?
Nothing was shiny or glamorous about Artizone and Nally's gym. It's just iron, sweat, determination, but you feel all those other characteristics. And he had his medal to prove, like, his
to back
up his character. Yeah. So it wasn't all lights and glamour, but it was like pure strength. And then, yeah.
So what about the man himself? Was there when you met him, like, obviously you walk into the gym, you know, a gym's a gym,
Yeah.
but to meet the man, I mean, you can walk into a gym and if there's a guy that's, you know, hey, yeah, the treadmill's over there, have fun, versus someone who's showing an interest and showing, you know, a desire to impart their knowledge of how to train and why to train, and the lessons that can, you know, you take those same tools outside of the gym and how they apply to life. Did you get some of that from him as well?
Absolutely. That was the difference. You know, he showed an interest in me before I walked in. When I walked in the door, I'd never even been in a gym before. You know, he gravitated towards me. I gravitated towards him. And he sat me down. He had this, like, index card, you know, and have me do, like, 20 minutes of cardio before I could go do the lap pull machine. And I remember hating cardio.
Yeah,
I just hated it.
Of course, everybody hates cardio. Well, I hate cardio.
I love it. I love it now. And, you know, when you're old like me and you stay out of shape, you don't have to put in a whole lot of hours on the cardio equipment.
So you said you met him around 16?
I was 14.
14. Yeah. Okay. So then from that point to 16, when you had the court-mandated order to report to an AA meeting, what changed, what shifted, and what put you on the path to, you know, now you're recovering, how would you phrase it, a recovering addict?
Yeah, I'm a person in recovery. Person in recovery.
So addict is kind of out. That's not language that is currently
it doesn't
used.
accurately describe me because I'm way more complex than just an addict. But I don't go around telling, hey, I'm Jason Gray, I'm an alcoholic addict, I have high blood pressure and a bad attitude today.
Sure, yeah, man, I get that.
No, so I like a person in recovery too, because I'm not, like, bound to limitations that are common in certain circles. I love all circles, and my goal is to bridge gaps between circles.
When you talk about circles, what do you mean?
Like, you have NA, you have CA, you have SSA, or SAA, I'm sorry. You have all kinds of different 12-step groups. AA, everybody knows AA is kind of the pioneer and the founder of the 12-step program.
So AA is Alcoholics Anonymous, NA is Narcotics Anonymous.
SAA is Sex Addicts Anonymous, CA is Codependent Anonymous, I believe. And then there's also Cocaine Anonymous, there's Heroin Anonymous.
Okay, so it's just different.
Overeaters Anonymous.
Basically a blueprint of the original 12-step program from AA but more niche to whatever the proclivity is that has put someone on a path to recovery.
Yes, sir.
Gotcha. Okay. And so your goal is to really, like, you see this as a human condition. It's
Absolutely.
not
we all carry a cross, man. We all, you boil it down to the end of the day, it's a character defect or a sin, whatever you want to call it. But we can put different labels on it and that don't tie into such harsh criticism and judgments, which is a little bit better platform for people. It's more inclusive than, say, just one religious body or one recovery program or one self-help group. We just want to cater to all mankind.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And that's I think that's what we've bonded over a little bit, is similar missions with a different trajectory in the way that we're pursuing that, but similar mission. And I think you need to have more than one approach, right? Because you're going to have people that respond to one and not the other, but if the end goal is the same, we're all pulling the same way.
Yeah.
So circling back then,
yeah.
What was the catalyst that put you on that path?
So let me back up and answer your question a little bit about, you asked where was the turning point? Why didn't you stay in the gym? Why did you end up in a treatment facility at 15 or 16 and 16? Gangs, to sum it up in one word, gangs, chemical dependency, everything that in a broken home, everything that comes from a broken home. I went from experiencing this culture and this life where there's security and peace, both parents are working in the house with careers, to the father disappearing and leaving mom with nothing but credit card debt and a few nice cars and a house and 2 kids. So we moved back from this really cool house by the baseball field to a small double behind Green Tree apartment complex, which was divided by a railroad track. I immediately got picked up by gangs, local gangs, and started rolling around and just doing whatever, acting crazy, acting out. And my mom was like, put a kibosh to it. She was like, this isn't happening. So she tried to fix, manage, and control the situation by doing a geographical change, which it worked to an extent. I just played the whole chameleon role, which I did as a survival technique my whole life. I went from being a gang member in Southport to a hippie in Center Grove, which I hung around. I did a lot of drugs and dropped out. And by 18, I was addicted to crack cocaine. And by 21, I was looking for a way out.
Was it through school, kids you knew at school, met at school, that kind of brought you into that fold? Or how did you, like, walking home from the gym, you just ran into these kids? How was that? How did that originate?
Yeah, so this kid that I would run around with, kid I looked up to, is like my best friend. We would ride skateboards. He was like that. We were at that weird age. I was, anyways. I don't know if it was. He was a really good kid, but we were into like shoplifting, skateboarding, anarchy. Just being rebellious. Yeah. So that was my guy. We were the guys with little razors, opening up the Christmas presents and then looking at them and taping them back up, putting them under the tree. His brother, he's just jacked. He is just that guy, but that was always top-notch guy, physically fit, highly motivated. That whole physical fitness thing was raging at that time, and I just kind of
Arnold was real big. Bodybuilding was taking off.
That's right.
All that stuff.
Yeah, Lou Ferrigno is kind of stepping down and making some space, but still doing his thing. He's still doing his thing today, man. Love Lou. Tanning beds, branched chain amino acids.
Yeah, Will, you hear that? You need to get in the tanning bed, bro. You're a little pale. Yeah, so in that, when you're talking about your friend and his brother, are you introduced to steroids at all? Is he that big?
No. Yeah, probably, because now that I think about it, I was never fortunate enough to get pulled into that culture. Although I was kind of looking for it. I was a little young, but I think there were some older kids that were starting to find their way. Yeah. Their anabolics and stuff like that. You could order online in the back of a magazine type of thing. maybe even probably oral stuff, oral testosterone boosters or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So from that, you decided to go the narcotics route instead.
Oh man.
Do you remember your first time using and what the circumstances around that were?
The first fun story I could tell you about using, I was 13 and I had older brothers, and I had a little sister, but I ended up swiping a piece of acid from my older brother and split it in half and shared it with my sister, and then jumped in the car and invited ourselves to a party with said older brothers. And we sat on the front porch while they went inside and were just drinking beer, those days. And we sat on the front porch and just watched the tree line and stuff like that and the clouds. And we were just like, oh my gosh, look, that's Weird Al Yankovic's hair. Like, that's him. Like, you see a silhouette. And just sat there and tripped for a while on acid. But then, so my stepfather left and my 3 older brothers kind of moved in. And one had just gotten out of the Army from Desert Storm, just got back from Desert Storm. One was dishonorably discharged for smoking pot, and the other one couldn't go in the Army because of medical reasons, and so he was home. But we would just rage. They would rage, and they weren't even raging really. They were 22, and they were all home, and they were drinking lots of beer.
So your intro to this
first time smoking pot was at 8, though, to back up a little bit.
8 years old.
8 years old.
Is this all? So would you say that the primary introduction for you was actually through your older brothers and your family directly, and not an external influence?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah, I learned to roll pot from my brother, and the first time I ever rolled a doobie, it was a cocktail doobie. I'm not going to throw which one of them under the bus, but they know who it is.
So, I mean, we don't have to harp too much on this. It's, it's a path that you start to walk. You find yourself going further and further down it. Did you have a goal in mind when you were using these substances? Was it an escape mechanism for you, or was it more just it's something to do because it's a small town and my brother's doing it, so it must be cool?
No, it wasn't really a small town thing for me because I was living in a big town. My older brothers from a small town were coming here, hanging out.
So you were in Indianapolis at that time?
Yeah, I thought I was the big show.
I got you.
Not my older brothers. But I didn't realize it at the time. I was doing drugs partly, like at first, just like to explore, to be creative.
I mean, LSD will definitely do that to you.
For sure. I started using it for other things too, to like, I don't want to think about X, Y, or Z anymore. I don't want to think about this trauma or whatever. This seems to glaze it. I don't even know if I realized that it was glazing my feelings until I was probably, 15 years into recovery or something. You know what I mean? Back then I wasn't doing it to glaze my feelings or to check out or to cope or to manage.
At least not consciously.
Not consciously, no, but I definitely was. Just not consciously.
So then we'll jump ahead to 21 when you voluntarily got back into the program. What was the catalyst for that? What motivated you to do it, and was there a person that helped you either point you in that direction, give you the guidance to say, hey man, I'm worried about you, I need you, I would love for you to either come with me or go to one of these things? What was the circumstances surrounding that? Sure.
So I'm going to back up just a little bit. My father took his life. He murdered himself. And prior to that,
And how old were you when that happened?
I was 21.
Okay, so this is right at that time.
Yeah, it was just after my father lost his life. I was down in Houston, Texas, living with him. I had sought him out, and I called. My stepmom answered the phone, said my father wasn't doing well. I made a plan and was down there 3 days later. I had this girl drive me down there.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to find your dad? And how long did it take you to find him once you decided to start looking? Or did you know where he was?
Yeah, this wasn't a new practice. This was like one of my old things. So like when I was 14, I found, or 12 or 13, I found my father via the Yellow Pages. I think my mom may have made contact the very first time, because I was so insistent on it. She was like, if you don't get up here and see your son, he's going to freaking like lose his mind. And this is at 12 or 13. So he came up for a week. He and his wife, they came up from Houston, hung out for a week, and then, which felt like 3 days. But then when I was 14, like a year later, I flew down to Houston to live with him, got homesick, moved back like 6 months later. And then I went and lived down there for a few months when I was 15 too, and got homesick, came home. And then when I was 21, I sought him out, called him up. So there was that gap from, what is that? Good Lord.
So 6 years?
6 years. And my stepmom's like, he's not doing well. And so I'm like, I got to get down there. And I just dropped everything I was doing here. I was on probation in 3 different counties in Indiana for doing dumb stuff. But dropped all that, drove to Houston, and 3 months after living with my father and like living my dreams too, really. We were, wade fishing in the Gulf of Mexico, flying kites, drinking beers together finally for the first time at the bar at the Ice House.
Mm-hmm.
And, everything was going smoothly for the most part. I was still kind of just being reckless, like quitting jobs, losing jobs. And 3 months of that, and we came home from a graduation party. The house was taped off. 2 days later, I came back to Indianapolis, and long story short, got picked up for warrants, those 3 warrants, and got sat down first in Johnson County for 107 days in a county jail. And in there, I was able to I had a Bible and I had an AA basic textbook. And I wasn't into reading the Bible at that moment. And it wasn't because I was like mad at God or anything like that. Like, I was cool with God. It was just a little too over my head. I couldn't wrap my head around it. So I would find a lot of joy in reading the personal stories in the back of the basic AA text. And then I was able to write to the General Service Office out in New York. And they would write back. And I was just like, that's the first time I've ever had good news via the mail in my life. Like, let's go. Like, this is cool. And they're out in New York. I've never been in New York. I've never really been anywhere but Houston.
So what is that?
Ohio.
When you say you wrote to them and they wrote back and it was good news, what does that process look like for someone who's trying to understand, or maybe even someone who's considering seeking help for themselves?
This is 99, so this is 24 years ago now. So it was just common, and plus if you're in jail, that's like the only way. There was no internet. So today we have over 450 meetings per week in Indianapolis, and I think that's probably cutting it a little short. Yeah, but you can just Google alcoholism and AA, and
nowadays it seems pretty straightforward. Like,
build a campfire. And
so what was the good news that came back from that letter?
That I wasn't alone.
Yeah, okay.
That was probably honestly the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing, right? Once you learn you're not alone, because I think you're living in your own silo. Everybody is, right? You're very myopic about your own life, especially at a younger age. You're not thinking about the world around you. It's like, these are my problems. Yeah. This is my shit, and no one understands me, right?
Right. And you're right. And if you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, chances are you were writing to a mom or maybe a dad or an aunt or a grandma, and their response is, well, honey, the show must go on. It just doesn't have the same ring as like, hey, we're going to send 2 men down there to talk to you, and we're going to help you when you get out.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, man. That's awesome. It's like,
so the resources are out there today.
It's a light in the dark at that point,
yes, sir.
Right? Okay, so then you do your 107 days,
and then bounce to Decatur County Jail, sum up my another 90 days that I owed them for not fulfilling my obligation on my operating while intoxicated charge that I got out there over a summer. Then I got out, and 2 days later I was back to my same old shenanigans. I was snooping through my mom's bag, grabbing some weed, smoking some weed. Had a friend flying in from Houston. We were going to the grocery store to get cigarettes and Doritos, and we leave with cigarettes and a case of beer, and off 6 months later, I'm homeless, psychotic again. or for the first time rather.
All right, so that's a big jump. So you have, did you ever meet with the two guys that came down from New York?
Yes, and they were local. They were in Johnson County. The way it worked, New York, telephone,
Gotcha.
Indianapolis, phoned Johnson County sent somebody out.
So you met with these guys. Obviously, that meeting wasn't the life-changing event because you next thing you know, you're out running your old game.
Yeah. What's funny enough is that I had a grasp on recovery, when I was at Johnson County. When I got bumped over to Decatur County and I got sat down, I ended up getting punched in the face in my cell and getting 8 stitches and was visited by Gideons, and I couldn't get anybody from AA or recovery related to come and visit me. And I couldn't relate to Gideons, and I was getting punched in the face. So it changed. Everything kind of changed before I even left. Like, I improved, but I fell off before I even left jail. And so I didn't contact resources. When I left Decatur County Jail, I contacted my mom.
So then what eventually was the catalyst that led you to say, you know what, I do need to change? And this kind of goes to one of the questions that I sent to you that said, this is one of the things we might cover, but I'm guessing that this is probably one of those moments in your life where you saw a real opportunity to make a hard left or a hard right versus just keep going down the path you were on. What did that look like to you, and what was going through your mind when you made that change?
Man, my mind just went 1,000 directions on that. It was like, for me, it was like going back to just doing what I always knew. What I did, it was kind of like a rat. Like, they just kind of go wherever the water is with the cocaine in it after they've had the water with the cocaine in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know enough about addiction or alcoholism to even understand what was going on. I just went and picked up a little bit of smoke and a little bit of beer. And the smoke was one thing, the beer was another. Like, it just goes 1, 3, 9, the rest of the case real quick for an alcoholic. And that's what it does every single time it gets in my system, which that ultimately leads me back to doing what ultimately tickles my brain, because it's the pinnacle of the high that I've gotten, which is, for me, it's my DOC, which is drug of choice, crack cocaine, which ultimately leads me to homelessness.
So the first time you found yourself homeless, what were the circumstances that put you there?
I had gotten back from jail, and then I went off on this mission and started smoking PCP, crack cocaine, drinking beer, whiskey, and it kind of melted my brain a little bit. And I was emotionally, it got me to a point where I was emotionally unstable, and my mom was like, I gotta take you somewhere. She took me to St. Francis ER, where I was so psychotic. I thought that our doctor was Robin Williams and Dr. Doolittle. And I thought that if they gave me the right pills, that I'd be able to pitch in the major leagues. So my brain was, out there. So I went through a 6-day stay at a psychiatric unit. And then after I got out of there, I was able to stay sober for an extended period of time. I think it was like 18 months, and then I relapsed. And then it was like 6 months later, I was back to like sleeping on a floor, waking up in vomit. And my mom was like, I'm going to take you down to Salvation Army Adult Rehabilitation Center and just kind of let you figure things out. And I was like, all right, cool. So I go down to Salvation Army Adult Rehabilitation Center. I don't even have enough identification to get into the doors at the homeless shelter or rehabilitation center for homeless people. So I had to do a couple things, like go down to the Social Security office, get a social card, or fill out an application. I don't even remember the processes that I went through at that moment. The guys at the counter at Salvation Army were able to point me in the right direction. But after I got my identification and stuff like that, I was able to go into Salvation Army's Adult Rehabilitation Center, where I graduated myself the first time through their 6-month program. I was so foggy and so messed up off of Depakote, Risperdal, and all these other medications that I was coming down from, the trauma of losing my father, which we didn't even know it was trauma at the time.
Mm-hmm.
and the chemical dependency and the crashing of the dopamines. My whole system was shutting down. I was at 6 foot tall and 120 when I got dropped off there.
Wow. So in the 18 months that you were sober in between, were you going to meetings at that time?
Yes, that was my first, I would say, real experience in AA. I was 21 and a half. Back then we would smoke cigarettes, eat donuts, drink coffee. That was a form of managing, I think, for a lot of people back then. And I remember hearing about a sponsor or something. And I was like, I want a sponsor that has the white Corvette out in the parking lot. It says fly on the front of it.
Yeah, man.
Bruce ended up being just an amazing guy, though. And, man, I'll tell you what, just holding hands with another man and praying was so uncomfortable for me. And that was an experience I had with Bruce, and it was scary. And it ended up being a really cool experience, and there wasn't anything to be afraid of.
Yeah, let's dive into that real quick. So I think a lot of guys have that apprehension about being physical with another man in a completely non-sexual context. But just for some guys, hugging is really tough. Even just doing a high five where you clap hands and there's at least your fists in between you when you're giving a hug. And then, holding hands even outside of a prayer setting would be, whatever. But just the idea of being in physical contact with another man is scary for a lot of people. Do you have any thoughts on why that is, or what was going through your mind? Was it a fear of any kind, or just a uncomfortable with how close you're, with personal space? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but I think John Eldredge could probably better sum it up, the author of Wild at Heart. He did Wild at Heart a long time ago.
I know Wild at Heart. Yeah, that was, my men's group was based off of Wild at Heart. Yeah.
So to sum it all up in a nutshell, if you take away a man's sword, he's going to take a stick and make it, kids will make sticks into swords kind of mentality. And I think to tie into that a little bit, I just think that we're primal creatures at the beginning of times, and sometimes we stay really, some cultures and some men growing up, they stay really true to this really strong exterior core. But I don't think, from the men that I've met that are that way, like my grandfather's that way, I don't even hug my grandfather. It's a firm handshake. You know? I think they love intently and passionately in their own way. I just don't think that, I don't know.
Do you feel like it broke something down in you? Like a wall came down the first time you had that experience and you realized, this connection feels good in my soul?
Yeah, no. Because for me, I had I experienced sexual abuse as a child. I have 3 incidents, 3 different times that we could touch on later, but so it had a really weird negative connotation to it to me. I grew up without a father, you know what I mean? I didn't get a hug from my father ever. I never remember holding my dad's hand ever.
Mm-hmm. So in that moment, once you
I was like, who's this sick weirdo that's trying to, he's got me in his den at his house. We just finished a pot of coffee and the 12 steps, not the 12 steps, but then we're on the 3rd step. So, it just seemed weird to me. I was like, this dude's smoking cigarettes and eating donuts and drinking coffee, and now we're going to hold hands and get on our knees and pray. That whole thing just seemed too weird for me. And everybody, you don't have to do the 3rd step the way that we did it, but for me, it was kind of cathartic in a weird way, because for the first time I'm addressing that this makes me uncomfortable. I am truly uncomfortable right now.
Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of opening up the doors and starting to look at that trauma, because, when I was 21, we would have done this podcast, you would have heard nothing about the topic of being abused as a child, sexually. That just was too taboo.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to out myself like that until I came out, and I was just like, holy shit, that's powerful. And there's no way that anybody should ever have to feel like they have to hold something in and not share it.
Yeah. How big of a weight did it feel like was lifted off of you when you were able to let some of that out?
Well, I'm here today instead of not being here, so that's the difference.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what for anyone listening who's not familiar with the 12 steps? What is the third step?
We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives become unmanageable. That's the first step. 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 2. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And that's like more of the third step prayer. It's like the extended version a little bit.
Gotcha. So that's
third step.
That's really what was the, holding hands, get on your knees and pray kind of that. So when you said it doesn't always manifest in that way, but the concept is it's a prayer.
Yes, it is. There is a third step prayer. It's God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self so that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help by Thy power, Thy love, and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Yeah, it's super short, beautiful, good way to start your day.
You've given me goosebumps a handful of times, and it's, like I said at the beginning, this is really the third day that we've spent together, ever.
Yeah.
And, so I knew a little bit of your history just because, Anna and Jenna talk, and so, we've randomly connected on FaceTime a couple times here and there. Between what peripheral stuff I've known and the conversation we've had yesterday and now hearing more of your story today, it's incredible to me that you are sitting here. And with the quality of life that you currently have and everything that you have going for you. And I definitely want to get to all of that. But the key of it is, what was the transition for you? Where would you say was rock bottom when you decided, absolutely, this has to change? And what was the catalyst for that put you on the upward trajectory? Like, obviously, it sounds like you hit bottom a couple times, you bounced, and you'd go back down.
Yeah.
What was the final time that put you on your current path of sobriety, and how long have you been sober to this point?
5.5 years. It's a great question. That brings me a lot of great joy to talk about that, actually.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, so, I had been around for 20 years. I'd probably at 20 years of sobriety, and I'm backing it up to like where the pivotal moment is to where I started this journey. So, for that 20-year period that before this last chunk, it was like I was in and out, but I would had probably 16 or 17 years of like sobriety or clean time in that 20. So there's really 3 years of like horrific relapses, you know what I mean, in that 20-year period. So, but it would be just like a year here, a year there, and to go out after having a year and to come back. I mean, anybody that's gone out and come back knows how gut-wrenching it is. Every single one. It doesn't matter if it's 30 days, 90 days, like they all hurt when you go back out. So it's funny, to answer your question, I'll never forget. I put the dope down. I'm watching Ray Donovan, and this guy, he's an adult, and he keeps on reverting, or he's stunted at an emotional level of a 14-year-old. And I'm like, I can identify with that because I started using drugs heavily at 14. And then, they say that you emotionally stunt your growth at the time you started, when you picked up and started using heavy. The difference was with this character on the Ray Donovan series was that his emotional maturity was stunted by way of being molested by a priest in their congregation. And so when I heard that, I was like, holy shit. Like, this actually happened. Because you got to remember, if you remember, I said there were 3 incidents. The baseball director one is the one that I buried. Like, I had talked about to my other friends in Bill W., I'd talk about the stuff that happened back home with my stepdad. But I buried that one with the baseball director, and never talked about it.
How old were you when that?
Like 39, 40. I was like 12, 13. It was when we were living in that cute little house over off of that McFarland.
Okay, so that was really right before you took the hard right into a heavy drug culture.
Bro, when it hit hard. Yeah, I was like, whoa. Yeah, I was able to trace back, because after that time, I started eating like mini thins, inhaling butane, consuming tobacco, and like chaw,
Now that you're watching Ray Donovan, you see this and you make this connection in your head, what's the next thing that goes through your mind?
pick up the phone, get on the horn, and call these people that are close to me that I've been like low-key lying to, and then tell them that I've finally been able to admit to myself that something very serious has happened in my life, and I've not been forthright in telling you this, because I've made amends to these people, and I've discussed in full length. I've sat down with a sponsor and gone over my personal inventory of things that I've done wrong. The thing that I never was prompted to address was maybe anything done wrong to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was hard for me to wrap my head around me being fondled and enticed and then led into being fondled again by an older man. It was hard for me to see that me having a part in it. And I know now then I was a child that was victimized, but I played a part in carrying that around and not telling anybody. So anyways, I could have spoke up. There were things I had a part in, and I've seen my part in it, but it's hard when you've been victimized. And so that was where like outside counseling really helped, because AA is great for addressing alcoholism. If you have a father and you grew up in a, somewhat stable community, but you got wasted and ruined your life, like, because you don't know how to not drink, like, AA is great for you. But if, like, you have a deep emotional trauma, there are other platforms.
So you got on the phone, you called your sponsor, you called the people close to you, and you unburdened yourself of this.
Yeah.
And so that
was the beginning. That was kind of just like the beginning of like coming out of the closet and having this whole new, like, made my head spin a little bit. I was like, wow, there are other ways to say come out of the closet on a topic.
Mm-hmm.
My sometimes constructed view a saying can mean one thing and one thing only, but it made me really, one of the first things I was able to do is really like have that empathy for all of my gay friends,
Sure.
or all of my friends who had to like keep their sexuality a secret, how freeing that must have been for them to not have to do that anymore. I felt like I was experiencing what that must be like on some level. And so that was really cool to be further connected in that community.
And once you unloaded that, it seems like that was the last stone that kept pulling you back down. Because at that point, that was where you got clean and stayed clean, right?
Yeah.
Man, that's crazy. So really, the trauma of your life, your father leaving, the revolving door of your mom's boyfriends, your father taking his own life, the abuse and other instances that occurred to you, all of these things, like you're unloading them slowly over time, and you're able to get sober for a little while, and then something will pull you back down. And once you got rid of that last big thing, it was like you can breathe, and now you can move on. Does that ring with you?
Yeah, that was like, it was like, you know what, dropping that piece for me was kind of like, okay, now you can work step one.
There you go. Yeah.
Now we can lay down, and now you can spend a year in your own place. You're 40 at this point, and you can pay your own bills for a while and see what that's like. And you can sit down, and I was able to make, I've been being an adult throughout this whole process of in and out and relapsing and making a mess of my life. I've also had some stability, and God has blessed me with some resources. I was able to have my own apartment. I had a full-size bed in one room, and I had 2 other full-size beds in the other bedroom for my 2 boys. And, it allowed me a medium, a space to collect my thoughts, start my practices, start to pray, start to make my bed, start to journal, start to meditate. And then once I focused on God and got right and centered with God, I was able to start to branch out and do other things and focus on other hobbies and stuff of that nature. And that was a really cool time of my life, that solo year that I spent just kind of discovering myself and unpacking myself a little bit.
So you're a 40-some-year-old dude.
40.
Living in a post-grad college first job type. And it's almost like really, like you talked about, you have a before life and an afterlife, and or a second life, a second shot at life. And this is your second shot at life. So you're basically starting on step one.
Yep.
Oh, you know, like some kids will go through high school and college, and that's phase one of life, and then after college is phase two. And your phase two is starting in that same location, like
sir.
small apartment, little, you know,
Riding a bike,
minimal.
mountain
Yes,
bike.
that's crazy. That's
Forerunner.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I want to know more about what you're doing now and what lights you up. Like, what do you feel is your mission and purpose that gives you the energy to get up in the morning and pursue the mundane stuff? Because on the other side of that is this purpose that you get to apply yourself to. And I know that you were talking about some of the creative stuff you've got going now. Share a little bit more about that and what that looks like, and what kind of brought that to the forefront for you as you're looking to move forward.
Sure. So a lot of it's like we were talking about earlier. You were talking about the starting off the beginning of your, you know, the second chapter of your life, so to speak. Like, and there have been other books written about how the first half of your life can be kind of you making the container that you're going to put the rest of your life in, or God's going to put the rest of your life in if you know, get out of the way. And so that mission kind of evolves. And what I like to do is keep it simple, man. It's kind of my mojo is keeping things simple, taking it easy, one day at a time sort of thing. And so, like, it focuses on communication, and the main overall agenda is world peace. And I feel like in order to chip away at achieving world peace, we do that through connectivity and communication. We do that by being transparent and all-inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's my purpose in life, is just to kind of chip away at world peace. And there are lots of different mediums and platforms that we can do that on. Right now, I'm working with a group who is allowing me the stability and the structure that I need in order to go out and express some creative, and have creative freedoms to express some of the information that I've gained over the years through recovery.
I want to know more about your stand-up. Yeah. So this is something I learned about you last night that blew my mind, is that you do stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
And you dropped a couple lines last night. I was like, oh, shit, that is good. That's good stuff. And, you know, it brings me back to, I've heard, you know, plenty of interviews with comedians, and one of the recurring themes is almost every comedian comes from a traumatic background. There's trauma in the life, and a great outlet for that is to be able to address it and make light of it.
Yeah.
And so hearing the jokes that you laid on us last night, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to hear this guy's story, because this is some dark shit, but it's funny.
Yeah.
Because you're able to look back at it and spin it in a way that can make others laugh, but at the same time make others aware that this is real, this happens to people, and we need to be accommodating and, you know, really just, we need to be there for people, because you don't know anyone's story until you sit down and have a conversation like this. You don't know anyone's story. Yeah. You can assume, right? But just making it accessible through a medium like comedy, I find is really interesting. So what got you into comedy, and why did you pick that avenue?
Yeah, good question. I wanted a healthy way to deal with some of the trauma and the stress and some of the pains of having, you know, 3 lawnmowers stolen out of your backyard in 1 year. Kind of stuff. And so acting, and I ran into an amazing comedian in Indianapolis, good friend, really cool dude. It's helped me a lot, just kind of realize that there is some potential there to be had, and it is an opportunity for a creative outlet. I go through this comedy boot camp downtown Indianapolis, and I learned the basics of doing stand-up comedy as a creative outlet to deal with some stress, depression, and that sort of thing. And then my second time performing, I got paid, and then found out that that's all it was required for me to be a professional comedian was one paid act. So my $11 gig at the American Legion got me in the game.
That's cool, man. So what's your creative process like as you're writing and thinking about stuff? Are you actively drawing on memories, or is it just like something will come to you and you make a note? I mean, how does that process work for you?
Some of it's storytelling. Some of it is I'm drawing on it's like some exercise. Some of it I look at as an exercise to draw back on traumatic events, rewrite the story, and put a funny twist on it after I've recovered.
Yeah.
And then present it to, people who may get something from it.
I guess the last thing I want to ask you is, based on all of your life experience and everything we've talked about, if you could go back and talk to yourself at that turning point, 12, 13 years old, what advice would you give to yourself at that point in time if you could go back?
There are people out there that care. Like, don't listen to that voice inside your head that says you're alone, dude. Like, legit, nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to hear it at all. There are people out there that love you and that want to listen to you, help you, and guide you. And you're not alone.
Really, I just want to thank you so much for sharing all of this. You're an incredible person. Your story is incredible is the word for it. I mean, looking at the history and what you came through to be where you are today, sitting in this chair, someone who just meets you today and hears your story would think you're two different people. And I think you might even say you're two different people, as we talked about, right? The beginning half of your life and now effectively a reboot, 2.0. And it's exciting to see where you're taking this. And man, I'm so excited to get to know you better and continue to grow this relationship. I think it's incredible that you were so open to this conversation, having met me twice and having no idea. So I do want to tell the story about.
That's funny,
yeah. So Jason and we were on a FaceTime call a couple weeks ago. Anna and Jenna were on a FaceTime call, and Jason and I happened to be present. So I pitched the idea to him, hey, I'm starting a podcast. Would you be interested? And he was like, yeah, man, absolutely. I'm interested. So we did not exchange cell phone numbers at this point. And so I went into the family group chat it was months ago, what we were bantering about. I found his number, and I found his number by just process of elimination of who I didn't know in the chain and knowing that he was in there. So I texted him and said, hey, man, if you're still interested in doing the podcast, great. Send me your email, and I'll send you just a general idea of what the questions are and what we're going to talk about. So I didn't hear anything for a day, and then I get a text back that's just his email address. And so I'm like, all right, cool. I guess he's still in. And I sent him the questions and then didn't hear anything back. We got here yesterday, and I was like, hey, man, you still down to the podcast? He was like, yeah. And it took him a minute to put it together. He was like, what were you thinking? All of a sudden, he didn't know it was me.
We're blowing up, baby.
Yeah, so he didn't know that I was the one that had texted him. He saved me in his phone as client number 5, just a random name, and had no idea what this podcast was or that it was me. So that was kind of funny to realize that. I mean, that just shows how open you are to conversation. You get a random text from someone who wants to talk to you, and you're like, absolutely, let's set it up. Yeah. I love that about you, man. And I think that we need more people like that in the world that are willing to reveal themselves. Because I think in revealing yourself, you invite someone else to do the same. And that's how we start to break down some of these walls. And, that piece that you're talking about starts with your individual self. You have to break down your own walls and expose all of the crap and let the trauma, let everything else spill out of you that you're ashamed of, afraid of, all these things. And once you let that go, it frees you up. You're so much lighter, and you can move out the world in a different, more productive way.
The gift of sobriety comes through way of surrendering, taking the credit out of it, taking the good compliment, the sting out of a bad compliment, and taking and neutralizing the euphoria that comes with a good comment, and just allowing room for God and kind of setting aside what we think we know and kind of letting God move and direct us. And I think that's what you're doing. That's what we're doing. I can tell, and I'm honored that you asked me to speak. I just think that I would be lying if I were to give you the impression that I'm doing this, because I'm not doing it like we are through.
I think it's all connected, power. Man.
Yeah.
Like you said, higher power, whoever or whatever it is that means that to you or is that to you. At the end of the day, it all leads one place, and we're all connected on some level.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's this connection now we're going to have a stronger relationship, and our collective ability to have a conversation is going to, effectively we're doubling in size, right? So it's the same as having one twig versus 5 or 6 or 10. And eventually, if we can get that thing big enough with enough guys that are buying into this idea of, I can let this go and I won't be in danger. I think a lot of that, because then when you let go of that stress and that anxiety, that's what shortens your fuse to violence, to all these other things. Is you're holding on too tight to all this shit that really just fucking let it go, and it frees you up. I mean, this is coming from a guy who, admittedly, I've lived a very sheltered life as a child in terms of not having to experience any of the trauma that you went through. And still, even in my life, all the stuff that I held on to, stuff that I was ashamed of, stuff that happened to me that was certainly not as traumatic as what you went through. But to me, it was, because relative to the rest of my life, it was very traumatic.
Absolutely, man.
Right? But in writing the book and putting all of that down in writing and then throwing it out into the world, whether anyone reads it or not, the fact that it's out there means it's off of my chest. Mm-hmm. And that's transformed me. And so having conversations like this is just an abridged way, or actually just a faster way. It's a whole lot easier to speak than it is to write all of these thoughts. Right. But that same principle, right? It's liberating, and it's driving the conversation and hopefully inspiring other guys to be able to do that same thing. Put your sword down. Put the sword down and create some room for love and personal growth, and that's the mission.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, hey, man, thank you so much again. I appreciate you. I love you.
Yeah, I love you too, man.
And, maybe in a couple of years we'll do this again.
Yeah, okay.
All right, brother.
Anytime, brother. Anytime.
All right, man. Thank you.
My pleasure.